Germanwings Flight 9525, 4U9525/GWI18G, was a scheduled international passenger flight from Barcelona Prat Airport in Spain to Düsseldorf Airport in Germany, operated by Germanwings, a low-cost airline owned by Lufthansa. On March 24, 2015, the aircraft, an Airbus A320-200, crashed 100 kilometers, 62 miles, northwest of Nice, in the French Alps, after a constant descent that began 1 minute after the last routine contact with air traffic control and shortly after the plane had reached its assigned cruise altitude. All 144 passengers and 6 crew members were killed. The French prosecutor, the French and German aviation authorities, and a spokesperson for Germanwings have said the crash was intentionally caused by the co-pilot, 27-year-old Andreas Lubitz, who was earlier deemed unfit for piloting duty by his doctor for mental reasons. Aircraft. The aircraft involved was a 24-year-old Airbus A320-200, serial number 147, registered as DAIPX. It first flew on November 29, 1990. The aircraft had accumulated about 58,300 flight hours on 46,700 flights. The original design service goal, DSG, of the aircraft was 60,000 hours or 48,000 flights. In 2012, an optional extended service goal, ESG1, was approved, extending the service life to 120,000 hours or 60,000 flights, provided that a required package of service and inspections was performed before the DSG was reached. Crew. The pilot in command was Captain Patrick Sondenheimer, who had 10 years of flying experience, 6,000 flight hours, flying A320s with Germanwings, Lufthansa, and Condor. The co-pilot was First Officer Andreas Lubitz, 27. Lubitz had taken time out from his pilot training in 2009, an acquaintance of Lubitz stated that this was due to having suffered from burnout and depression. He had 630 flight hours of experience. Lubitz suffered from major depressive disorder and had hidden his illness from his employers, including tearing up physicians' sick notes. Bild, a German tabloid, reported that he had received psychiatric treatment for a serious depressive episode 6 years before the crash. Passengers. There were 144 passengers, 2 pilots and 4 cabin crew on board, most of them German and Spanish nationals but from at least 18 countries in total. The early count was confused by dual citizenship. Among the passengers were 16 school children and 2 teachers from the Joseph Koenig Gymnasium of Haltern am See, North Rhine-Westphalia. They were on their way home from a student exchange with the Giola Institute in Linares del Valles, Barcelona. Haltern's mayor, Bodo Klimpel, has described it as the darkest day in the history of our city. Bass baritone Oleg Bryjak and contralto Maria Radner, singers with Deutsche Oper am Rhein, were also on the flight. Flight 9525 took off from runway 07R at Barcelona Prat Airport at 10 hours 1 minute and 12 seconds set, 09:01.12 UTC, and was due to arrive at Düsseldorf Airport by 11:39 set, 10:39 UTC. The flight's scheduled departure time was 9:35 set, 8:35 UTC. The Directorate General for Civil Aviation, DGAC, the French Civil Aviation Authority, declared the aircraft in distress after the aircraft's descent and loss of radio contact. According to the French National Civil Aviation Inquiries Bureau, the Bureau d'enquêtes et d'analyses pour la sécurité de l'aviation civile, BEA, English, Bureau of Investigations and Analyses for the Security of Civil Aviation, pilots confirmed instructions from French air traffic control at 10:30 set. At 10:31.02 set, after crossing the French coast near Toulon, the aircraft made a slight course correction, left its assigned cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, 12,000 m, and without approval began a rapid descent. Radar observed an average descent rate of approximately 3,500 feet per minute, 17.8 meters per second. Attempts by French air traffic control to contact the flight on the assigned radio frequency radio link were not answered. The descent time from 38,000 feet was about 10 minutes. A French military Mirage jet was scrambled from the Orange Caratat air base to intercept the plane. According to the BEA, radar contact was lost at 10:40.47 set. At the time, the aircraft was flying at an altitude of 6,175 feet, 1,882 m. The aircraft crashed within the territory of the remote commune of Prats Haute-Léon, 100 kilometers, 62 miles, northwest of Nice. The crash is the deadliest air disaster in France since the crash of Inex Adria Aviapermet Flight 1308 in 1981, in which 180 people died, and the third deadliest in France behind Flight 1308 and Turkish Airlines Flight 981. This was the first major crash of a civil airliner in France since the crash of Air France Flight 4590 on takeoff from Charles de Gaulle Airport in 2000. The crash is also the first loss of a Lufthansa-owned airliner during the cruising phase of flight. Crash site. The crash site is within the Massif des Trois Évêches, 3 kilometers, 1.9 miles, east of the settlement of El Ivernay and beyond the road to the Col de Mariat in an area known as the Ravin du Rose, on the southern side of the Tête du Traverse, a minor peak at the lower western slopes of the Tête de l'Estrop. The site is approximately 10 kilometers, 6 miles, west of Mount Samet, where Air France Flight 178 crashed in 1953. Police and Securite Civil sent helicopters to locate the wreckage. A picture from the accident site was released, with the report that the aircraft had disintegrated, the largest piece of wreckage being the size of a car. A helicopter landed near the site of the crash and confirmed that there were no survivors. The search and rescue team reported that the debris field is 2 square kilometers, 500 acres, in size. The plane appears not to have deviated from its heading during the descent. The DGAC set up temporary flight restrictions in the area surrounding the crash site. The prohibited area was first set on March 24 at 11:47 GMT, 12:47 set, a circle of 3 nautical miles, 5.6 kilometers, radius centered at 44°1650 and 6°2625 E from FL000 up to FL140. At 13:38 GMT, 14:38 set, a second larger area was added to cover a radius of 10 nautical miles, 19 kilometers, 12 miles, centered at 44°1648 and 6°2624 E from FL000 to FL100. Entry into the airspace is forbidden, except for state flights or for rescue missions. Rescue efforts were suspended overnight by the French authorities to ensure the safety of the rescuers. The Bureau d'enquêtes et d'analyses pour la sécurité de l'aviation civile, BEA, opened an investigation into the crash, joined by its German counterpart, the Federal Bureau of Aircraft Accidents Investigation, BFU, and assisted by the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. On March 24, the BEA sent 7 investigators to the crash site, accompanied by representatives from Airbus and CFM International. The cockpit voice recorder was recovered by rescue workers and was examined by the investigation team. The recorder was damaged in the crash, but was still in a usable condition. The BEA released photos of the CVR and was able to extract a voice recording. On March 26, Marseille prosecutor Brice Robin, French and German authorities, and a spokesperson for Germanwings all stated that the crash was intentional. Lufthansa CEO Carsten Spohr stated that the pilot returned to the cabin from a toilet break and tried to enter the cockpit, but co-pilot Andreas Lubitz, a 27-year-old German citizen, did not open the door. After banging on the door, with no response from the co-pilot, the pilot, who had a code to open the door, unless the panel was disabled from the cockpit controls, proceeded to hit the door with an axe. Transponder data show the autopilot had switched from the cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, 12,000 m, to 100 feet, 30 m, which is the lowest setting for the autopilot. During the descent, the co-pilot did not respond to questions from air traffic control and did not transmit a distress call. Marseille prosecutor Bryce Robin said that contact from the Marseille air traffic control tower was audible on the cockpit voice recorder multiple times. Robin said that the co-pilot Lubitz's responses, initially courteous in the first part of the trip, became curt when the captain began the mid-flight briefing on the planned landing. Lubitz is thought to have manually set the plane on the descent that drove it into the mountain. The screams of passengers can be heard on the voice recorder in the final seconds before impact. Bryce stated that we only hear screams at the very end, it's in the last moment and death was instantaneous. The plane was traveling at 700 kilometers per hour, 430 miles per hour, when it crashed into the mountain. Police searched Lubitz's home for evidence, including religious ties. However, Marseille prosecutor Robin responded to a reporter's question about Lubitz's religious background by stating, "I don't think that's where the answer to this lies." On March 27, German detectives searched properties in Montabaur that Lubitz spent time in and removed a computer and other items away for testing but stated they had not found a suicide note. On the same day there were numerous media reports that Lubitz had been suffering from depression, although the coverage by some tabloid newspapers attracted criticism. On March 27, German detectives found a letter, in a waste bin in Lubitz's apartment, indicating that he had been declared unfit to work by a doctor. Germanwings reported that it had not received any sick note for the day of the flight. Response: Political. French Minister of the Interior Bernard Cazeneuve remarked that due to the violence of the impact there was little hope that any survivors would be found. Prime Minister Manuel Valls dispatched Cazeneuve to the scene and set up a ministerial crisis cell to coordinate the response to the incident. German Chancellor Angela Merkel traveled to the crash site on March 25 together with Minister-President of North Rhine-Westphalia Hannelore Kraft. German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier flew over the crash site on March 24, describing it as a picture of horror. Merkel visited the recovery operations base at Saint-Lé-Alpes along with French Prime Minister Valls and Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy. Commercial. Several Germanwings flights were cancelled on 24-25 March, which the pilots' union says was due to grief at the loss of their colleagues. Lufthansa chief executive Carsten Spar visited the crash location on March 25, and afterwards said that this is the darkest day for Lufthansa in its 60-year history. Shortly after the crash, Germanwings changed its website and social media branding to grayscale images. Lufthansa, Swiss, and Austrian Airlines also did the same thing. On March 25, Germanwings retired the flight number 4U9525, changing it to 4U9441. The outbound flight number was also changed, from 4U9524 to 4U9440. The flight numbers for the later Düsseldorf to Barcelona flight remain unchanged. When reporters asked Germanwings if another member of the flight crew must be present in the cockpit when one of the pilots leaves, they replied that the company has no such requirement, nor do European regulations. Impact. Aviation authorities in Canada, New Zealand, and Germany have implemented new regulations that require 2 authorized personnel to be present in the cockpit at all times in direct response to the crash. The European Union's top air safety agency has recommended similar changes to be introduced. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration already requires 2 people to be in the cockpit at all times. A number of airlines announced similar changes to their policies.